What's going on, guys? Dr. Mike here, and today we are getting into learning outcome 4 of Unit 2. So what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to be looking at the actual cell structure of the muscle fibers or the myocytes or myofiber types. We're going to look at how muscle fiber type is going to affect overall function, and we're going to finish that off here with athletic performance and adaptation. So let's go ahead and get right to it. So first off, when we talk about muscle fiber types, the words that always come to mind are fast twitch and slow twitch. And this is primarily true. Now, there's actually several subtypes of muscle fibers, and you could think of this in the way you would think of breeding dogs. You have purebred dogs, and then you have mixed breeds, or for lack of a better word, mutts. With our muscle fiber types, we have purebred muscle fiber types, and we have what are known as hybrid muscle fiber types. So if you look at a breakdown of muscle fiber types, you'll see that the two types of muscle fibers we have are type 1 and type 2. However, in between all those are a bunch of different hybrids. So we're going to try to simplify this here and focus mostly on the as close to purebred types as we can. So the three different muscle fiber types we'll look at here are going to be type 1, type 2A, and type 2X. Your type 1 muscle fibers are your slow twitch fibers. Your type 2 muscle fibers are your fast twitch fibers. With type 1, these are the ones that are going to be highly oxidative, and they're the ones that are going to primarily be your endurance type muscles. Now, while this does mean that something like this can help you with, like, say, an endurance event, what this really means in a practical sense is that these type of muscle fibers are going to be the ones that actually help you do most of your day-to-day tasks. The type 1 fibers you have help you to stand up and stand for long periods of time. They help you to be able to walk, support your body weight on your feet. So these are the fiber types that are very fatigue resistant. They can last for hours and hours. Now, the problem with them is that the diameter of these fibers is a lot smaller than your type 2 fibers. They have a smaller motor neuron, and they don't have a good ability to grow. So, meaning they don't have a really good ability to be hypertrophic or to experience muscle fiber diameter growth. And if you think about it, you have a lot of, say, slow twitch fibers or type 1 fibers in, say, your low back or your feet or your hands. How big, would you say your feet get in terms of their muscular size? Or how big do your hands get? Yeah, your hands can get a little bit bigger than they normally are, if you're using them quite a bit, especially if you're doing a lot of like manual labor or a lot of things where you're doing a lot of gross motor skills with them. But you're not going to get your hand muscles to get as big as, say, like your biceps or your pecs, something like that. So that's what it's meant by saying that type 1 fibers don't have a good ability to grow. They are not very hypertrophic. When you have a type 1 or slow twitch fiber, you also have a low force generation, which you can see from this graph here. While it's true that these fibers are going to last a lot longer, or they'll be a lot more fatigue resistant than, say, your fast twitch fibers, they also are going to be a lot less forceful. So they have a lot less force production here. Now, when we get into our fast twitch or type 2 fibers, those break down into several different categories, but the two we're going to focus on here are type 2A and type 2X. Type 2A, while they are fast twitch, you would think of them as kind of an intermediate or a medium speed. They're much faster than type 1, but they're not nearly as fast as type 2X. So what they do is they are what is known as your fast fatigue resistant fibers. So these would be your longest lasting anaerobic fibers. They also do have an oxidative capacity, meaning they can also use oxygen. So your type 2A fibers are a hybrid fiber. They'll last on their own. If you were to distress them completely, they would go for roughly half an hour up to an hour in terms of how long they would last. They're a little bit bigger, especially than the type 1 fibers. They have a little bit more force production, but they're still just kind of in the middle. Now, when we get to type 2X, these are the money makers. If you are any kind of professional athlete other than an endurance athlete, you are relying on type 2X fibers to do virtually everything for you. These are your very fast twitch muscles. They have a very low oxidative capacity, a very large diameter, fatigue very easily, but they have the highest force production. These are the guys that allow Mike Tyson to have a knockout punch. They're not going to last long, but they will give you one solid punch out of you. And if you connect, everything's going well for you there. Now, one thing we didn't really touch on, but we should, is mitochondria. So we explained in the last module how mitochondria work, but in terms of the muscle fiber types, when you have oxidative capacity or you use oxidative respiration, you are going to have a lot of mitochondria, because mitochondria, being the powerhouse of the cell, are going to rely on using oxygen through the electron transport chain. So your type 1 and type 2A fibers have a lot of mitochondria in them. Your type 2X, since they have very low oxidative capacity, they have low amounts of mitochondria. Primarily, they are getting their energy from glycogen. So these are the guys that are going to work great for you for maybe 5 minutes, and then they're going to peter out here. And when we talk about the fifth learning outcome here, we'll get into some of the different force velocity curves, the strength velocity curves, things like that, which will explain this better. But for now, you should know that your mitochondria are highest in oxidative respiration situations. So type 1, type 2A fibers. Your mitochondria are lowest in your type 2X fibers. Now, we've talked about motor units before, and just as a little refresher here, motor units are just simply the connection of a nerve, or what's known as a motor neuron, to a muscle fiber. So a motor unit is just that nerve muscle fiber connection. That's all it is. Now, expanding on that, all muscle fibers within a motor unit will all be the same fiber type. So meaning, over here, these are all muscle fibers within a motor unit. Now, if we want to get technical with it, the blue fibers are technically one motor unit, and the red fibers are another motor unit. But every one of, let's say, the red units are one muscle fiber type, and every one of the blue units are another muscle fiber type. So when you have a motor unit, all of your muscle fiber types are the same. This means that you cannot have both a type 1 and a type 2 muscle fiber in the same motor unit. Your body won't work that way. It's like, how easy is it to pat your stomach and rub your head at the same time? The way that your motor units work is that they are specific to one fiber type. You get one motor unit for one fiber type, you get a different motor unit for a different fiber type. They don't cross over, they all stay the same. This means that motor units and muscle fiber types tend to aggregate pretty close together. Now, finishing up here with kind of the important stuff, exercise adaptations. So I mentioned the mitochondria previously, and mitochondria will adapt to exercise relative to your muscle fiber type, exercise intensity, and exercise duration. This means that if you are doing, say, a long endurance type training, it's going to be more conducive for type 1 fibers to build up more mitochondria. If you were trying to get a mitochondrial response from a different muscle fiber type, you have to adjust your exercise training to accommodate that. So if I have a type 1 fiber, I want to be doing endurance training. If I have a type 2A fiber, I'm going to do moderate intensity and moderate duration. And if I have a type 2X fiber, I'm going to be doing high intensity. Now, where this becomes something that's very practical is when we get into a discussion on muscle fiber type transformation. You are born with a certain setup of muscle fiber types. So genetics plays a role in this. And with your discussion question for this week, we're asking you to try to support an argument on whether elite athletes are born or created. Now, partly they're born, partly because your genetics plays a role in what your initial muscle fiber type distribution is. However, your muscle fiber types are able to be transformed, meaning that with proper training, you can actually transform most of your muscle fibers into other different muscle fiber types. This doesn't necessarily mean that you can be a world record holder, but it does mean that you can be a high performing athlete on your own, regardless of what your genetics says. This won't mean that if you pick up a baseball for the first time, you can throw 100 miles an hour, but it does mean that with training, you can turn type 1 fibers into type 2 fibers, and vice versa. In terms of elite level athletics, with the exception of your extreme endurance and marathon based runners, type 2X fibers are the #1 indicator of being an elite level athlete. The more type 2X fibers you have, the better the athlete you're going to be. Even though these are going to be very fatigable, or these have a low amount of endurance to them, most all sports you play only require very short bouts of intense energy. Therefore, if you can get the fastest or the most powerful amount of energy you can muster every time you do it, even if it's in short duration, you will most likely be above everyone else. So your type 2X fibers are the money makers in terms of being an elite athlete. This means that most everyone's training methods, especially for sports, are grossly flawed. While it's a good idea to have an aerobic based endurance, if you aren't an endurance athlete, you're doing yourself a disservice by focusing on endurance training. So when coaches make you run miles and miles or things like that, or they make you do long endurance bouts of exercise, that's actually counterproductive for what most everyone's athletic environment is. Now, again, if you're going to be an endurance athlete, if you're going to be a marathon runner, if you're going to be doing, say Ironman type competitions, if you're doing, even say like these Spartan run type things, yes, you absolutely need to be doing endurance training. But for most all other sports, doing endurance training is actually going to be detrimental to you, because the more endurance training you do, the more slow twitch fibers you will develop. Now, let's say you're a baseball pitcher. If I am a great endurance athlete, which many baseball pitchers will do tons and tons of running, that's great. You have a great amount of endurance. However, you're taking away from your production of intermediate and fast twitch fibers, so your type 2 fibers, and you're transforming most of those into type 1 fibers. If you want to throw 90 to 100 miles an hour, you have to have type 2X fibers. If you have too many type 1 fibers, you're not going to be able to throw at an elite velocity. Now, one of the other things to consider here is that you can always change this. While there's still a lot of confounding research out there, most researchers would agree that you could at least change roughly 10% of your overall muscle fiber types within a couple months. So within about 2 to 3 months, you should be able to get at least a 10% shift in your muscle fiber types. So even if you do start doing the endurance training and you're not going to be an endurance athlete, you can still start to fix that slowly but surely. Now, when we talk again next time, we're going to get into our actual force production, and we're going to bring this all together to see how this actually can be applicable, to the real world, and what it means for our different, muscle functions, and how we can apply exercise to this. So until next time, I hope you have gotten at least a better understanding on muscle fiber types and the role that our motor units play within our muscle fiber types. And I will see you all later.